Spoiler alert, The Hobbit and its monster were mentioned in The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, which also addressed some of the issues raised by the Peter Jackson trilogy. With the rights to adapt Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, The Rings of Power Season 2 has been slaying epic monsters, many of which are taken directly from the fantasy author's works. Episode 4 of Season 2 introduced a powerful worm creature. This creature is reminiscent of a scenario from The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies, even though it is not as well known as Shelob, the Ents, or the Barrow-wights. In addition to introducing Tolkien creatures like Ents and Shelob to the world, Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit trilogies also unveiled a lesser-known monster. The movies were allowed to adapt the same content that was used in the show. A massive worm monster that resembled a sandworm from Dune emerged from the ground in The Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies. Although this monster was a contentious addition to the film and had only a passing connection to Tolkien, the Rings of Power's worm monster appears to be the same creature and offers insightful information about it.
There's the Black Forest. Nothing comes out of there alive.
Welcome to Movie Spy. The worm monsters in The Hobbit, an explained origin in Episode 4 of The Rings of Power. Elf Arendir described the worm monster from Season 2 of The Rings of Power as a nameless thing, which raises the possibility that Jackson's monster was one of these.
What was that?
There are nameless things in the deep places of this world.
Nameless objects are not well known, although Gandalf came across some of them in his battle with the Balrog. Gandalf clarified in the Lord of the Rings book that the world is gnawed by nameless things far, far below the deepest delving of the dwarves. Not even Sauron is aware of them. Their age surpasses his. This unnamed creature attacked Isildur and pulled him into the muck, but Arendir overcame it. As a result, viewers were given a new perspective on the creatures that eat the earth. Given that this worm beast burrows underground like the animals Gandalf described, it makes sense that it has no name. Though it appears that Rings of Power added its own interpretation to Gandalf's nameless things, the creature is strikingly similar to the worm from the Battle of the Five Armies. In questionable fidelity to the original, Gandalf referred to Jackson's worm in the film as a worm. It makes a little more sense to think of the creature in the movie as a nameless thing. Why the Hobbit movies were worms were contentious because they were featured more in the film than in the book. The use of worms in a Hobbit adaptation surprised some people. Jackson divided the plot of a single children's book into 3 adult films, which required significant alterations to the canon of the narrative as well as several additions. The wealthy decision infuriated those who were hoping for a faithful adaptation of the beloved Tolkien book. Among the changes that drew criticism was Azog's usage of wereworms in his evil army, which was never mentioned in the book. But there were wereworms in Tolkien's tale. At one time, Bilbo Baggins, the main character in The Hobbit, made reference to them. Bilbo responded, "Tell me what you want done, and I will try it if I have to walk from here to the east and fight the wild worms in the last desert." Beyond Bilbo's lone reference to them, worms were never mentioned in the book and were merely a Hobbit folktale. Though not universally accepted, Jackson's addition of worms to the Hobbit storyline was entertaining. Rings of Power expanded on the movie monster that Jackson started creating, elucidating its place in the legendarium and bolstering the possibility that it was a real monster, not just a folktale that lived in Tolkien's universe. A fun expansion of Tolkien mythology is the worm beast Tolkien desired to write legends. The dialogue amongst the Lord of the Rings adaptations pays homage to the essence of Tolkien's writing, which layered myth, mystery, and truth upon myth. Inventing a metabolic series that viewed each book as a publication of characters within the narrative and developed an internal myth system, J.R.R Tolkien was ahead of his time. The narrative found in The Hobbit was penned by Bilbo in his Red Book of Westmark. Tolkien created a mythopoeia, an enigmatic collection of made-up myths, by using a biased viewpoint to mask reality. The on-screen incarnations of the legendary worm beast mesh well with this mythology. After Frodo finished this Red Book of Westmark, it contained the narrative of The Lord of the Rings. Similarly, Tolkien acknowledged that many of the essays, poetry, and stories he authored about Middle-earth were penned by elvish minstrels or scribes. Tolkien allowed the possibility of several versions of the truth by portraying his stories as somewhat biased. Jackson was now free to experiment with the notion that Bilbo's folktale was true. As a result, Rings of Power was able to use Jackson's monster as a model for their own worm monster. The Silmarillion was published by Tolkien's son following his death, and subsequently, alternate versions of the published stories in the universe of The Lord of the Rings were published. This illustrated the progression of the narrative and clarified the editorial decisions taken for the Silmarillion. Several additional and alternate tales were found to be just as relevant as the Silmarillion due to inconsistencies. All of it somehow contributed to the creation of a larger myth. More power to adaptations that can capture this framework. The monster in The Lord of the Rings. The Rings of Power Season 2 belongs to a legendary Tolkien tradition, whether it is a wereworm, an unnamed entity, or both. Thanks for watching.